How are you? Don't you do that. Don't you do that. Back off.
This is Timothy Treadwell. He's someone who seemed to believe he was a very special person on a very special mission. Today we're going to watch some footage of him and talk about the narcissistic need to believe in one's specialness, even if it is a vulnerable narcissistic need. And we're also going to talk about regressions into childlike states and addiction.
Don't do it. It's okay. I love you. 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 I'm sorry.
Timothy Treadwell is a tragic figure. Of course, being a tragic figure does not mean that he's not to blame for his own demise. In ancient Greek tragedies, the hero would always have a fatal flaw. Most often hubris, excessive pride. Pride comes before the fall, after all. In the case of Tim Treadwell, his hubris may strike you as particularly stupid or delusional, depending on your disposition, and it was the belief that he could live amongst the grizzly bears in wild Alaska as their friend and as their savior. And he did live among them every summer for 13 years before he was devoured by one. Werner Herzog was the perfect filmmaker to tell this story, what with its tragic and bizarre protagonist driven by an obsessiveness that Herzog is clearly fascinated by. And I, too, am fascinated by Tim Treadwell and with the documentary Grizzly Man. So I want to lend some interpretations to this story as to what might have driven Tim Treadwell into that grizzly maze and into the delusion of being the savior of the bears and into the death of himself and his girlfriend. I'm Andrew Vandervaart, a psychiatrist and neuroscientist, and any opinions expressed in this video are purely my own.
I have no idea if there's a God, but if there's a God, God would be very, very pleased with me. If you could just watch me here, how much I love them, how much I adore them, how respectful I am to them, how I am one of them, and how the studies they give me, the photographs, the video, and take that around for no charge to people around the world. It's good work. I feel good about it. I feel good about myself doing it.
In this case, as often is the case, when people are insisting to this degree that they're good and that they're special and that they're happy, there is a kind of methinks thou dost protest too much.
And I want to continue, and I hope I can. I really hope I can. But if not, be warned. I will die for these animals. I will die for these animals. I will die for these animals. Thank you so much for letting me do this. Thank you so much for these animals, for giving me a life. I had no life. Now I have a life.
There's a desperation here. There's a sense in which his life depends on this sort of calling he believes he's found. And I often find that people that need to insist that they're so special, in fact, feel the opposite, but can never confront that feeling.
Most times I'm a kind warrior out here. Most times I am gentle. I am like a flower. I'm like a fly on the wall, observing, non-committal, non-invasive in any way. Occasionally I am challenged, and in that case, the kind warrior must become a samurai, must become so formidable, so fearless of death, so strong that you will win. You will win. Even the bears will believe that you are more powerful. And in a sense, you must be more powerful if you are to survive.
So notice he cannot help but smile as he voices this conclusion that you must be more powerful than the bears.
In this land with the bear. No one knew that. No one ever friggin' knew that there are times when my life is on the precipice of death and that these bears can bite, they can kill. If I am weak, I go down. I love them with all my heart. I will protect them. I will die for them. But I will not die at their claws and paws. I will fight. I will be strong. I'll be one of them. I will be the master. Love you, Rowdy. Give it to me, baby. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about.
So one thing we can see with Tim Treadwell is that he seems to be getting a significant amount of ego validation from the fact that he feels he must be more powerful than the bears to be able to survive amongst them when he is occasionally threatened by them. It must mean that he is in some way their master. And what does that mean? Well, that means he's more powerful than one of the most powerful animals in the world.
Go ahead back. Go back. This is a subadult, and this is what happens to them. They work together, and they get really powerful. As you can see, I'm just feet away. You just relax. You just relax. I've now proven myself as being able to hold my ground, and therefore earning their respect. This is Rowdy the bear, and he's rowdy. He's getting bigger. But that was a challenge, and you have to remain cool in the challenge, in the moment. If you don't, you're dead. They can kill. They can bite. They can decapitate.
What I'm suggesting is that Tim Treadwell has this need to be special. And where does that need come from? It might come from the fact that he doesn't actually feel special. His core feeling is that he is worthless in some way, or that there is some hole in him that needs to be filled. So he needs to believe that he is special and that he has worth. What that need leads to is a belief that he is special. Because if he holds that belief, if the more he believes that he is special, the more he can deny that feeling that he has that he is not actually special, right? So he's chasing filling this hole with the feeling of being special, and he convinces himself cognitively that he is in fact special because the need leads to that belief that I think reaches the point of delusion in his life.
I think he was over 10 feet high, don't you? Oh, he's a big bear. He's a big bear. A very big bear. Wow.
The first thing I notice about Timothy Treadwell is that his demeanor is quite childlike.
Anyway, he's over here rub-a-dub-dubbing. He's a big bear.
And so that childlike affect, it's a definite contrast to the way Timothy Treadwell wants to present himself. You know, he wants to have this. He wants to see himself and present himself as a kind of rugged Jack London kind of character that's out there, you know, Bear Grylls kind of guy.
There's going to be a number of takes I'm going to do. These are called Wild Timmy Jungle scenes. We're going to do several takes of each, where I'll do it with a bandana on, maybe a bandana off, maybe two different colored bandanas, some without a bandana, some with the camera being held. Kind of stumbled on that one. Let's do it again.
But in fact, what he looks more like is a kind of Peter Pan out in the wilderness with these kinds of silly facial expressions and turns of phrase. And it makes me think about Arrested Development with him. So, you know, stages of psychosocial development are something that are essentially analogous to stages we see in all of biology, right? You know, developmental stages happen for all organisms throughout their lives. And so in psychiatry and psychoanalysis, there's this analogous idea of psychological stages. Now, Freud had very interesting ones, I think, you know, with the oral and anal and all that kind of stuff, but that's sort of lacking in the kind of pragmatic realism that Erik Erikson's stages have. So I really like the Eriksonian stages. Each of them is defined by the typical chronological age associated with the stage and with the fundamental question that needs to be resolved. And the idea is that it requires the resolution of each one of these conflicts to be able to move on to the next stage. So you can see in infancy through 1.5 years, the question is, can I trust the world? Or, you know, is the world okay? Is it a safe place? If that resolves, you can move on to the early childhood question of, is it okay to be me? You know, am I okay? And each of these is associated with a kind of conflict that needs to be resolved. If it's okay to be me, I can be autonomous as a being. If it's not okay, I have shame and doubt. So the next one is it okay for me to sort of move? Is it okay for me to take actions? And that's initiative versus guilt. And then with school-age children, you know, starting kindergarten and really first grade and onwards, the question is, can I make it out in the world of people and things? And that's the industry versus inferiority. Like, I'm either able to be industrious or I'm inferior. And then there's adolescence, where you have identity versus role confusion. And that's the question of who am I and what can I ultimately be? And so it's in this sort of pre-adulthood series of stages that I want to focus with Tim Treadwell, because we see him struggling with multiple of these conflicts. Inferiority, I would say, is a big one. It's what's driving that need to believe that he is actually superior. If he has this unresolved sense of inferiority, he needs to overcome that, again, by insisting on the belief that he is superior and by pursuing things which give him a sense of non-inferiority, of being special.
Government's given me all they have so far. I've stood up to it. I've had danger in the boat, almost died, I've almost fallen off a cliff. Yeah. The danger factor's about to amp up in the maze. The maze is always the most dangerous.
Now, with Erikson, the idea was if you didn't resolve one of these conflicts, it's going to continue to present issues for you for the rest of your life until you resolve it. But this sort of goes hand in hand with the idea of arrested development and the idea of regression. So the idea of developmental arrest is if you don't resolve the goal of that developmental stage, you actually cannot psychologically move on, and so you will act as though you are a school-age child in some cases. Or you will be a perpetual adolescent if you can't figure out who you are and what your role in the world is. And it's not as simple as a mere stagnation and just being arrested. There is a lot more dynamism allowed for here, with the idea that regression can happen in the face of stress, so that you sort of go backwards in time. And, regression is something we see certainly in behaviors. Like school-age children themselves will sometimes regress to pre-potty training if they have a major stress. They'll have a period of incontinence where they're wetting the bed, despite having not wet the bed for years and years, because there's some new stress that essentially makes them retract back into a simpler state, because it's as if it's not safe to be that age anymore. There's something bad about this age, so let me go back to the last time it was safe. So I think it's not a stretch to say if it happens with things like bedwetting, it probably happens with things like speech, mannerisms, and internally with the way you see the world. So you'll regress to seeing the world the way a child might see the world. Perhaps, let's say, believing that animals are teddy bears, right? Or acting the way that Tim Treadwell acts.
Oh, he's a big bear. He's a big bear. A very big bear. Wow. Anyway, he's over here rub-a-dub-dubbing. He's a big bear.
At times like this, when he's saying, he was up there rub-a-dub-dubbing, it's very childlike. So his behaviors are very childlike, but I think the way he sees the world is very childlike as well. So I'm immediately thinking there's some reason that he felt inferior from a young age, and that's leading to the insistence that he is not inferior to a pathological degree, as well as often presenting as though he is still a child.
I would be within the physical presence of bears 24 hours a day for months at a time.
This is crazy. This is nuts. These are the most dangerous animals on the face of the earth. And
Wow.
you want to go and put yourself in harm's way 24 hours a day?
I think they've been misunderstood.
How can I believe that if
First of all, Dateline's Keith Morrison, I'll never not smile when I hear his voice. There's something about Keith Morrison's just folksy gruffness. But so we see another thing that living amongst the bears does for Timothy Treadwell. Not only does he have the immediate experience whenever he's able to sort of turn away a bear, and avoid harm, that is an immediate feeling of power. So he has that. 2, he's going to develop this belief that he's actually the only one trying to save the bears, so he has a kind of purpose and cause. And 3, he's getting social validation and celebrity from this lifestyle. So what he's finding is that this pursuit is doing so much for that ego need. But again, this idea that he is now a national celebrity from his summers with the bears kind of contradicts the image of the rough and tumble outdoorsman. And so I just get the sense that there's still kind of a role confusion, even when he's in the periods where he's moving past this sense of inferiority because it's getting solved by all of these acclaims. he still doesn't quite know who he is. Is he an activist? Is he an outdoorsman? Is he tough? Is he a sweetheart? He seems to be all of these things without knowing exactly who he is.
You are about to be killed by a bear that you wouldn't say, oh, I made a mistake. I'd like to have a gun.
I would never, ever kill a bear in the defense of my own life. I would not go into a bear's home and kill a bear.
In his final year, the 13th of his Alaskan expeditions, Tim Treadwell continued in what had become his established practice of first camping in the more open areas of the wildlife reserve and then moving into the thicker brush, which is what he called the grizzly maze, to watch the salmon run of the fall. This year in particular, he had decided to delay his exit by a few weeks, and it's been suggested that this added risk to his already risky behavior, as that is the time of year that bears might become most desperate to put on fat before the winter. In Tim Treadwell's footage from his final expedition, there are two bears in particular, either of which some people have speculated might be the bear that killed and ate him. Whether or not that's actually the case, I think it is reasonable to suggest these are the types of bears most prone to attack a human, and in fact, Tim Treadwell himself suggests this.
I'm here on camera with Ole, the big old bear, and the big old grumpy bear. He just took Cracker out of the creek area. There's not a lot of fish here, so you could understand him wanting to have control of the creek. I met him on the pathway the other day after feeling sorry for him, thinking that he was a bit thin, a bit gaunt, and he promptly charged me with the intent to probably strike. I know the language of the bear. I was able to deter him from doing that, and I'm fine. But I will tell you something. It is the old bear, one who is struggling for survival, and an aggressive one at that, who's the one that you must be very careful of. For these are the bears that on occasion do, for survival, kill and eat humans. Could Ole, the big old bear, possibly kill and eat Timothy Treadwell? What do you think, Ole? I think if you were weak around him, you're going down his gullet, going down the pipe.
We hear Tim Treadwell's notion that he's just sort of friends with the bears. The story he tells of meeting this bear is the kind of story you'd tell about how you met someone at school or something, you know, that you just met him while you were walking along the hallway and you kind of felt sorry for him because he seemed out of place.
I met him on the pathway the other day after feeling sorry for him, and he promptly charged me with the intent to probably strike. I know the language of the bear.
And then you also have the part where he wants to feel like he's more powerful than the bears. So, you know, I was able to deter him, and if I were any weaker, he would probably eat me.
I was able to deter him from doing that, and I'm fine. But I will tell you...
So this is definitely an illustration of Timothy Treadwell's kind of increasingly unrealistic view of what the bears are. I think when he first started going out there, it was more so a fascination from a distance. These are majestic beasts. But what he started to do was escalate from that emotional distance into an increasing degree of emotional involvement, which for the most part, I think was a drama in his own head, that he was friends with the bears and that he knew the language of the bears. Now, likely he did pick up certain types of survival behaviors in terms of like how to know when one was about to charge, but he combines that with this kind of personality-based view of the bears, that this one's grumpy, for example. So in the same way that you might escalate with an addiction, Timothy Treadwell seemed to escalate in terms of his involvement with the bears. To get the thrill, he would need increasingly close encounters with them.
I want to introduce you to one of the key role players in this year's expedition. The bear's name is the Grinch. Grinch has come on to be one of the more frequent bears here in the grizzly maze. The Grinch is a female of about 5 years of age. Oh, hi, Grinch. Hi. And she has kind of an aggressive attitude. Hi. If I turn around too much, she'll bite me. It's okay. Hi, how are you? How are you? Don't you do that. Don't you do that. Back off. Don't do it. It's okay. I love you. 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 I'm sorry.
So there's almost this fantasy of a push-pull relationship he has in some of these cases. He definitely likes the feeling of sort of winning in a confrontation over a bear, but then he also has this kind of fantasy that they love him, right? It's not enough that they fear him. He wants them to both fear and love him. So the push-pull is, get away, don't do that, and then I love you, I love you, I love you. I think this drama is entirely in his head, because we can't really presume to know what the bear's decision-making process is at all in those cases. But, from what I've heard listening to Wes on Tooth and Claw, it's probably something along the lines of, this isn't worth it. Or just, I don't have a reason to attack. The overinterpretation in Tim Treadwell's mind is the bear is realizing that Tim is stronger and is a beloved leader, and so the bear's not going to attack. I think that's an overinterpretation. It may also be an overinterpretation that we hear from this particularly cynical guy in the movie Grizzly Man, who says the reason the bears didn't attack him is because they probably thought there was something wrong with him.
I think the only reason that Treadwell lasted as long in the game as he did was that the bears probably thought there was something wrong with him. My opinion, I think Treadwell thought these bears were big, scary-looking, harmless creatures that he could go up and pet and sing to, and they would bond as children of the universe or some odd. I think he had lost sight of what was really going on.
I think it is accurate that when Tim Treadwell is acting childish, singing lullabies to the bears, etc., he is also viewing them the way a child might, a child that has not learned the ways of the world and has the kind of childlike innocence that borders on gullibility, even in normal cases. In this case, I think it went beyond gullibility and into, again, delusion. But so what I'm saying is the childishness we see in Tim Treadwell is not an act. Psychologically, it's how he's functioning internally. He isn't just pretending to be this child of the universe trying to bond with the bears. It's what he's experiencing.
Hi, Tim. What are you doing up there? That's where you're sitting? Hi. Hey, you little champion. Hi. How are you? You're such a good champion. I love you. I love you. Okay, get up there and guard that tent.
To me, one of the most tragic things about the Tim Treadwell story is that he couldn't just be happy filming foxes. Even though he has these moments of just pure joy and playful humor amongst the foxes, that wasn't enough for him. Because he had this hole that he needed to fill, this need to be special would not have been satisfied by mere nature photography or by animals that aren't so ferocious and intimidating as bears.
Only Timmy is the boss of all foxes and all bears. You're the ruler. We patrol the Grizzly Sanctuary together. How did we meet? Over a decade ago. And we watch over things. And he's the boss. Takes care of everything. Yep. Yep. Yes, I love my headband. I think one of the things that's really important is you can see the bond between this very wild animal and this fairly wild person.
When he's with the foxes, there is still the childlike nature, And there's still the potential for criticism that he's habituating wild foxes to humans. But there's also a sort of peace that I feel from him during those times, that he's not subjecting himself to the intense drama that the bears provide. And there's a sort of relief in that. But of course, it seems to never be enough. He couldn't be satisfied without this false sense that he was special, that demanded justification. Why am I special? Oh, because it's the grizzly bears, the most dangerous and deadly animals. Not only that, I must be the only one that can save the grizzly bears. I must be the one. And everyone else, therefore, who's involved with the bears must be the enemy.
Well, I'm here with one of my favorite bears. It's Mr. Chocolate. Hey, Mr. Chocolate. He is the star of many people across the country, children, people, adults, and we're here in the Grizzly Sanctuary, but I'm wrapping up my work here in the Grizzly Sanctuary. Why is that? Because I'm on my way to the Grizzly Maze, where bears do not have human protection, but are under human threat. Bears like Aunt Melissa, bears like Demon, Hatchet, Downy, and Tabitha, and it's time for me to go to protect them.
Now, in actual fact, the entirety of Tim Treadwell's expeditions took place in Katmai National Park and Reserve. These were federally protected lands, and so the idea that these bears needed Tim Treadwell's protection was baseless, or more precisely, based in fantasy. The escalation of this fantasy seemed to play into Tim Treadwell's overall escalation of psychological dependency on the bears. In its final form, it took on the grandiose notion that Tim Treadwell was the savior of the bears, with the paranoid counterpart that other people wished harm on the bears and on Timothy, that there were people intent on stopping him on his sacred mission. But before we talk more about that, let's trace back the thread of his psychological dependency on the bears.
But how did I come into this work? I was troubled. I drank a lot. Did you know that? I used to drink to the point of that I guess I was either going to die from it or break free of it. But nothing, Iris, could get me to stop drinking. Nothing. I did everything that I could to try not to drink, and then I did everything I could to drink. And it was killing me until I discovered this land of bears and realized that they were in such great danger. They needed a caretaker. They needed someone to look after them, but not a drunk person, not a person messed up. So I promised the bears that if I would look over them, would they please help me? And they become so inspirational that I did. I gave up the drinking. It was a miracle. It's an absolute miracle. And the miracle was animals.
Now, Timothy Treadwell here cites drinking as the primary addiction. In his de facto autobiography, he actually also writes about drug addiction. He wrote that in the late 1980s, he had overdosed on heroin and cocaine and was rescued by a Vietnam vet named Terry, and that it was at Terry's urging that he went to Alaska in the first place to watch the bears. But I do believe Tim Treadwell's account that it was in fact this newfound love of the Alaskan wilderness and the grizzlies that enabled him to overcome his addiction. And that is because I believe he was using alcohol and drugs to fill that same hole, that he was using alcohol and drugs to make himself feel okay temporarily, right? But then he found something that was even better at filling that hole, which was the grizzlies. But the problem was he did not address the root cause of his addiction, and so his addiction is displaced onto the grizzly bears, and that becomes its own even more severe addiction, I think, that escalated to the point of destruction, as pathological addictions tend to do. Addiction at its heart is a kind of seeking, an intense seeking for something like the feeling that I'm okay or that I'm not worthless, that has these moments of relief. There are these periods where you feel okay, but that's only ever temporarily in your grasp, right? In the longer term, it's a seeking for something that is forever just out of your reach. But so to replace that constant seeking of something beyond your reach, it takes something else that must be even more worth seeking, right? Even more worth pursuing. And we can think of this in neurobiological terms too, right? I mean, dopamine is the common link between all drugs of abuse and all addictive behaviors. And dopamine drives reinforcement, so it's often thought of as the reward chemical, but really it's more about salience and seeking behaviors. So consider a preconscious brain with only the most ancient structures, reptilian as they're called. And the role of dopamine in the deep brain is just that of movement. So dopamine in the basal ganglia initiates movement, and that is literal seeking for the organism. It's seeking food or reproduction or seeking safety in the case of fear. Now, when you overlay the cortex onto these reptilian structures, dopamine still has the same end goal, movement, but now it's sort of involved in the planning stages of movement as well, right? So like the premotor cortex, but even more abstract thoughts and complicated perceptions can still be thought of as ultimately precursors to action, right? So dopamine underlies motivation. So pre-movement, right? If you're motivated to do something, ultimately you're moving. So what does dopamine feel like? Well, it feels like this thing is worth pursuing. So it feels like this thing is significant. If it's a perception that's triggering cortical dopamine, you perceive it as significant and worth something. If it's a thought, it's a thought that feels significant and worth pursuing. So what dopamine feels like is significance or value, and what it does is motivate action or pursuing the thing with value. So why are addictions so hard to quit? Well, because they're bypassing any kind of pre-addiction logic you might have had, because the substance or behavior is talking to you in direct dopamine terms. And dopamine is the thing that assigns value to things. So if you're trying to sort of have an argument about whether something is valuable with yourself and you have an addiction, the addiction has all of the currency. It is driving the stuff that is your sense of value. So it's like if someone grows up being told drugs are dangerous, and they believe this growing up, they've been told it, why wouldn't they believe it? So they say, okay, drugs are dangerous, and yet in a moment of experimentation, they try it, and then from there they say, oh wait, I didn't realize how worth the risk this was, right? Because the drug is driving this dopamine, so they're like, okay, yeah, I always thought it was dangerous, but wait, this really seems worth it. And so they'll kind of devalue the risk and overvalue the reward because it's an unnatural amount of dopamine. And you can't necessarily argue with your own dopamine about what's worth doing, because the dopamine is what's defining what's worth doing. And then the process of addiction is doing something more and more, such that for a while you're wanting to do it more and more, and eventually you're having to do it more and more. And the end state is perpetual seeking. It's a state of perpetually wanting more, never being satisfied. Now, someone like Tim Treadwell was at risk because they were already in a state of never feeling satisfied, right? So at least the addiction is giving them these transient moments where they feel satisfied, but they're all the more prone to the seeking. They've been seeking their whole lives. For a moment, they get the thing, then it's out of their grasp, they're going to escalate.
And it was killing me until I discovered this land of bears. I gave up the drinking. It was a miracle.
And now the way Tim Treadwell talks about the bears, he's talking about them as a sort of higher power. He's almost making a deal with the bears the way people make a deal with God, right?
So I promised the bears that if I would look over them, would they please help me?
I'll help you if you help me. I'll do whatever you want if you just help me with this. And you know, higher power, the idea of the higher power part in 12-step programs is crucial to 12-step programs, right? Because the higher power, by definition, is the thing beyond which there is no seeking. And this is why it works, is that it's the thing which you cannot seek more than, right? You know, you can't seek for more than God, because if there were anything more than God, that would then be God. This is sort of like the ontological argument of St. Anselm. But I think that's a crucial principle, that you can't just say anything is a higher power. It needs to be sort of this ultimate thing, because what the person needs to do is not be able to keep the seeking cycle going. Now, it might be said that 12-step programs are trying to replace an addiction to a substance with an addiction to God, but the fact is, the substance had already become the person's God in the sense that it was their be-all, end-all. It was the thing that they defined as having the highest possible value in their personal value system. And to say this is merely about substituting another addiction for another, I think is to underappreciate the elegance of the solution. So the first step is actually a surrender, right? Recognition of the powerlessness the individual has over the dopamine circuit that has been fed and massively empowered by the substance. And then the second step is recognizing a higher power, which is to say fundamentally re-encoding your sense of what ultimate value is. So that is in fact an attempted frame shift from your higher order cortex. It's your higher order cortex intervening to say, we can't keep thinking of this one thing as the ultimate value. We have this other thing now, and you're reassigning how to assign or interpret dopamine, because that is what it is to assign and interpret value. So all of this is to say, I understand that not everyone has the disposition for 12-step programs, sometimes because explicitly of the religious component to it. But my read on the literature is that it works as well as most anything else. And for the people that do have that disposition, when it works, it really works. And I think it is the crucial difference here in terms of the bears enabling the seeking circuit to only escalate as opposed to intervening on the addiction. So I think the bears are replacing one addiction for another, and what needs to happen is that you fundamentally disrupt the addiction circuit. So the other ways to do that would be, I think intensive psychotherapy in the case of someone who's never felt okay. I think exploring the reasons for not feeling okay and really challenging those beliefs that were probably encoded from a young age, that might be something that interrupts the addiction circuit. Medication-wise, I think what we can do sometimes is essentially interrupt the survival instinct. When it gets to the point of thinking you're going to die if you don't have the substance, interrupt the survival instinct part to enable changes in thoughts and behaviors. Or perhaps in one case, naltrexone, I think we are actually intervening at the level of the addiction circuit and pharmacologically disrupting it. But again, what we're seeing in Tim Treadwell is a person that seemed to have a fundamental developmental arrest, was struggling with issues of identity, who am I, very often struggling with inferiority, am I good enough? As his addiction escalates, in some sense, I think he regresses even further back around issues of trust versus mistrust. But in his case, what made the grizzly bears an even better addiction, something that he was willing to substitute in, was the fact that it was better addressing that question of inferiority. And I think the escalation of that addiction was, no, I can't be inferior. Look, I'm able to survive amongst the grizzlies out here. And then it went to, no, I can't be inferior. I'm able to even turn the bears away when they start approaching me. But it escalated still to a point where I think he started regressing even further back. And we see periods where he's as far back as, the trust versus mistrust question, where he starts getting a kind of paranoia. He becomes so possessive of the bears as this thing that he needs for himself that he doesn't trust anyone else that's involved with the bears anymore. He becomes a kind of golem, paranoid about anyone else encroaching on his territory.
I'm submitting this as Sunday, August 1st. It is 4:35 and 18 seconds on this day.
It's hard to say, but it's a warning of a sort, and it's obviously here to upset me.
And then at the same time, he can use that new narrative to still be trying to fulfill that ever-increasing need of non-inferiority, because once he's made everyone else the bad guys, once the government is after the bears, well, now I can say I'm not inferior because I'm the savior of the bears, right? So it leads to this kind of splitting where I need to know I'm the good one. I've always needed this. Now I'm at a point where I'm the only good one and everyone else is bad. Everyone else is trying to kill the bears. Only I can save them. And so that at that point, I think, is a grandiose delusion. It's completely contrary to the evidence that this is all a wildlife preserve. In some cases, maybe the government is after him because he's violating rules of the national park.
I have decided to violate a federal rule which states I must camp 1 mile. Every week I must move 1 mile after staying for 7 consecutive days. If I was to do that here, I would not be able to study these bears. I would not be able to really protect them. I'd have to actually move out of the bay to get 1 mile out. Therefore, I have decided to protest the United States government and guard these bears anyway and stay.
But if anything, he's displacing what is really just his own persecution onto the bears, right? So he's saying, because I am so good and I am one of the bears, if you're persecuting me, really, they're trying to keep him from like camping too long in one area. They're trying to keep him from getting eaten. That's what the park rangers are doing. But he then displaces that onto, if they're against me, they're against the bears. It's me and the bears versus the world. And that is the kind of end stage of this addiction. And I actually do think Gollum is a appropriate literary reference here. I think the story of Smeagol getting the ring and the effect it has on him, where he forgets even his own name and regresses to this Gollum amphibian kind of character. I think that's a very powerful representation of addiction. And I think that as Tim Treadwell gets increasingly paranoid about the park rangers and such, he is becoming Gollum-esque, where the bears are his ring.
Hi, Timothy. See you in summer of 2001. Now, it doesn't say, hi, Timothy, we're going to fucking kill you. It doesn't say, hi, Timothy, you're fucking dead, we're going to chop your legs off. Hey, Timothy, get the fuck out. It just says, see you in summer of 2001. But it is some sort of a warning. It is some sort of a ha-ha. I don't think it's friendly. Well, it's gotten a little worse here with, there's just the warning, hi, Timothy, see you summer of 2001. Now I find this big stack of rocks that were, put some labor here. We're not calling this the building of the pyramids, but we are saying there's a bit of trouble. Now, I'm going to walk back, I'm going to bring you back here. Here's where the sign was here, which is where my tent is. And then we go over where my bear-proof barrels would be, and we find boulders piled up, and a happy face indelibly painted into the rock, like looking at me. Very, very frickin' frightening, huh? Whoever put it there knew what they were doing. It's a warning. And the thing is, it's better than a warning it's better than like you're fucking dead type of thing. It's creepy, baby, it's creepy. It's Freddy Krueger creepy.
So Tim Treadwell's most unhinged rant comes toward the end of the movie Grizzly Man. And for our purposes too, it serves as a sort of denouement of a troubled man, tying together the various threads I've introduced in this commentary.
Well, we're into autumn now. Expedition 2001 coming to an end. The bears moving safely towards their winter dens. The foxes hiding in the woods, safe from the humans that would come to harm them.
So again, the idea that there are these villains, people out to harm the bears, and he has utterly convinced himself of this.
It's been an amazing season. It's been difficult. But I came, I served, I protected, and I studied. And I promise, I'll be back.
He, on the other hand, is this hero, and he's convinced himself of this, a belief serving as a rock-solid wall guarding against any feelings of worthlessness at the core.
my hair.
Right, so remember, having an inflated ego is not the same as being confident. It's in fact the opposite of confidence. It's inflating an ego artificially rather than building one. So he's insisting that he's this great person, he's trying to project this confidence, and yet at the same time, he's worried about his hair.
People, for me, Timothy Treadwell, I came here and protected the animals as best I could. In fact, I'm the only protection for these animals out here. The government flying over a grand total of 2 times in 2 months.
But protecting the bears from what? Are you protecting the bears from the government, or is the government not doing enough by only flying over twice? These things aren't founded on logical associations. They're founded on needing to get to a certain conclusion and then coming up with a bizarre, illogical justification.
How dare they? How dare they challenge me? How dare they smear me in their campaigns? How dare they?
So this illustrates kind of where he's gone with his cognitive state and the way in which delusions of grandeur can lead to paranoid delusions. He needs to get to the conclusion that he's the one true hero and the only person that can save the bears, and then that must necessarily mean there's villains everywhere trying to harm them or smear him or whatever they're doing.
And I come here in peace and in love, neutral, in respect. I will continue to do this. I will fight them. I will be an American dissident if I need be. There's a patriotic time going on right now, but as far as this government's concerned, fuck you, motherfucker.
So the corresponding emotional state is in this severe regression back to the trust versus mistrust conflict of infancy. He now feels that the entire world is untrustworthy in this utterly black and white view where he's the all good versus the all bad, and he's overwhelmed by this terrifying world, and he's throwing a tantrum about it. He's fundamentally unsatisfied, regressed to what Erikson would call the infancy stage of development psychologically.
Let's do a couple of nice takes now. Oh man, did I get angry? Them, right? They do not watch these animals. They don't care about these animals. All they want to do is screw people like me around. It's amazing. As government's concerned, you motherfucking Park Service.
Now Treadwell crosses a line with the Park Service, which we will not cross. He attacks the individuals with whom he worked for 13 years.
So then we have Werner Herzog coming in with his voiceover, letting us know that Tim Treadwell then went into very personal targeting of individuals. He's going after people that he knows and that he has known for years from going to this national park every year. So this really is a lashing out. It is the tantrum, a sort of primordial seeking of destruction because one cannot be satisfied by the world. Just burn it all down. Now I will actually bring in Freud here at the end. I've been using the Ericksonian stages, but the Freudian stage that would correspond to Erikson's trust versus mistrust infancy stage, the Freudian stage would be the oral stage. So for Freud, regressing into the oral stage would mean seeking a return to infancy when all of your needs were met through the mouth. You know, suckling milk was always going to be the thing that satisfied you. That was really your entire waking world as an infant. Your whole world was just coming to you through your mouth, and there was a source of satisfaction, right? Getting the milk. So if an adult regressed to the oral stage, might they end up trying to get all their needs met through some oral provider of satisfaction like alcohol, right? I mean, alcohol is sometimes referred to as just the bottle, right? Like going back to the bottle. Going back to the bottle sounds like a phrase that could either mean becoming an infant again, to go back to the bottle of formula, or, you know, relapsing to drinking alcohol. And if alcohol becomes your addiction, you're essentially creating that world where the only way to really satisfy your needs is through this oral interaction with the world, that, you know, this thing that provides the satiety through a kind of suckling. I know this might sound crackpot or psychobabble, but I can't help myself. I'm going to go one step further, because there is one step further back on the regression chain in psychoanalysis theory, and that would be to return to the womb. So a state of pre-infancy, wanting to regress all the way back to the womb. And now what would that regression look like? What would it look like to seek the womb? Well, wanting to merge with someone else, or literally even go inside someone that you love and just fully depend on them. Now your gratification, your satisfaction, you don't even have to suckle because you're just in this womb. All your needs are taken care of. So I just have to suggest, as Tim Treadwell's addiction to the bears escalated, he emotionally regressed further and further until on some level, maybe he wanted to go inside of a bear. This is not to say that he explicitly thought about being eaten and how that would accomplish an ultimate merger with the bears that he wanted, but emotionally he did seem to want that. Because, I mean, how else are we going to explain this part?
It's warm. It just came from her butt. This was just inside of her. My girl. I'm touching it. It's her boob. It's Wendy's boob. I know it may seem weird that I touched her, but it was inside of her. It's her life. It's her. Everything about them is perfect. It's her boob. It's Wendy's boob.
He kept trying to get closer and closer to the bears, seeking ultimate closeness. And so in this life, I'm not saying that he chose to get eaten by a bear, but he did make all of these implicit decisions along the way to increase his risk of this. You know, the last year he stayed for longer. He was putting his tent more and more directly on the trails that the bears were walking. It just seems like he wasn't going to be satisfied until he was eaten. And that would be the ultimate regression. Now, if you want to know exactly how things did come to an end for Timothy Treadwell, in the fall of 2003, when Tim's pilot friend came to pick Tim up in the small prop plane that was always his transportation to and from the Katmai Reserve, there were no signs and no answers to the pilot's calls. He went up the thick brush of the hill, but sensed an ominous quiet and hurried back to his plane. At the bottom of the hill, he turned around, saw a, quote, nasty-looking bear stealthily making its way down the trail with its head down. So the pilot, Willie Fulton, started doing some flyovers, circling the camp with the intention of trying to scare the bear away. However, during these flyovers, Willie Fulton saw what appeared to be that same bear now leaning over a human rib cage and eating from it. Willie Fulton called in the Rangers. A group of them came and had to shoot the bear, then confirmed that the remains in that bear's stomach were those of Tim and Amy Huguenard, both of them mostly devoured except for a few grisly body parts that had been left strewn on the ground. We also know that when the attack actually happened, Tim Treadwell's camera had been recording. It seemed that when there was a commotion outside of his tent, Tim had gone outside to investigate and Amy had turned the camera on, albeit not taken the lens cap off, so only the audio was recorded. It's unclear to me whether the audio of the lethal attack has been released. In Grizzly Man, Werner Herzog listens to the audio tape after it had been released from case evidence into the possession of one of Tim's lifelong friends. After listening to it, Herzog told that friend, "You must never listen to this," and she said she wouldn't and would destroy it. I certainly think Werner Herzog was correct in that advice. The only thing I could see that tape doing is just searing itself into your brain, becoming something that you can't unhear, and potentially causing a vicarious trauma. Now, I have seen that there are audio clips on the internet, including YouTube, which claim to be the actual recording. I don't know if these are authentic, but I know I haven't wanted to listen to them. I've not listened to them regardless. There are also written descriptions available online of the tape's content, which do seem to be an authentic transcription. The primary source being the journalist Nick Jans, who interviewed a scene investigator from Alaska Fish and Game named Larry Van Dale, specifically about the tape. So I have read the written transcription, and I somewhat regret even exposing myself to that. So I'm not going to go through all of the details here. You can decide for yourself if you want to go further down the rabbit hole. I will give a sort of narrative overview with the pertinent quotes identified as Tim and Amy on this final recording. The audio is described as being roughly 6 minutes. It starts with Amy asking, "Is it still out there?" And the next thing is Tim starting to scream from outside the tent. He's yelling, "Get out here, I'm getting killed out here." You can then hear Amy unzipping the tent Then she starts screaming and yells to Tim, "Play dead." The screams seem to deter the bear as it breaks off the attack, and then you can hear a quiet conversation between Tim and Amy where they're trying to figure out if it's really gone. Unfortunately, the bear can then be heard to return to its attack on Tim. From here, both of them start yelling at each other, variations of fight back. So the last resort, when playing dead isn't working. And Amy tries to fight off the bear. The sound could be heard of a, quote, frying pan used to beat the top of the bear's head, end quote. Finally, we can hear Tim saying, "Amy, get away," and repeating this several times. And that's the last thing that's said. There are said to be additional minutes where there are no vocalizations before the tape cuts off. I definitely think the most unfortunate thing of all is that Amy Huguenard put her faith in Tim Treadwell in taking her on this expedition. Tim was taking known risks for himself, but she trusted in his lead and tacitly believed that he would not let harm befall her. But it did, in the most horrifying way possible. Rather than protecting her, he clearly brought her into harm's way. Amy, on the other hand, certainly tried to protect Tim at the end. It is a definite testament to her courage and strength that she did not just immediately run away when Tim started being attacked, but rather she stayed by him and actually tried to fight off the bear, hitting it with that pan, staying for a time even beyond when Tim initially told her to run away. So I certainly do think we should feel sympathy and respect for Amy Huguenard. With Tim Treadwell, the story of Tim Treadwell is a cautionary tale. I don't think having some amount of sympathy for him and how he ended up in this kind of state of addictive seeking for contact with the bears and a grandiose delusion about them, I don't think it's misplaced to have some sympathy, and I don't think that will detract from the cautionary nature of this tale. I imagine he's a polarizing figure, that there are people that will very much relate to his idealism, misplaced as it was, and there are people that'll be utterly disgusted by him. But I can't see him as anything other than a tragic figure. One who didn't know what he was doing by the end. I suppose I share this so that we may better know what we are doing. Thank you for watching.